Church family and friends, welcome back to another episode of the FPC Rome podcast. I'm Jessica Baker, our communications coordinator and podcast host. This episode is a little different. No video, no set, it's just me, and I am here to tell you a story. It's a story about a girl and about a season where Psalm 23 went from being something familiar to something she had to cling to. So I just want to invite you to listen and maybe see where the Lord might meet you in it too. On January 25th, 1987, a baby girl was born in Floyd Medical Center. It was Super Bowl night, so I'm sure her doctor was thrilled that this was the appointed time for her to come into the world. The firstborn to a 20-year-old mother who had no idea what she was in for, but one thing I know for sure. If love was enough to change things, our lives would have looked very, very different. From the very start, this baby cried relentlessly. Despite the doctors and nurses saying that everything was fine, her mother decided to finally switch her to formula, and at 6 weeks old, the crying finally stopped. But this was only the beginning. Around age 3, she was sick again, and off to the pediatrician they went. Only this time, the sickness was extremely visible. In those days, the pediatrician's office was right across from the hospital, and her mother recounts a harrowing story of how the little girl went limp in her doctor's arms, and she watched as he ran across Turner McCall Boulevard directly into the emergency room. The cause? Viral meningitis, which landed them quite the stay back in the very place she was born. Shortly thereafter, the chronic ear infections began. The girl has distinct memories of lying on the sofa in horrible ear pain while holding a warm, wet washcloth up to her ear, while her mother has distinct memories of waking up only to find her daughter with a blood-soaked pillow and a crusted-over ear from all of the infections seeping out in the night. The solution? Tonsils and adenoids out and tubes put in. Alas! The ear infection stopped, she could finally breathe through her nose, and other than severe motion sickness every time they traveled just about anywhere, it seemed that her body had arrived at a place of rest. In her young childhood, she declared that there were two things she wanted to be when she grew up, a writer and a preacher. She recounts how every now and then, when her grandmother had to be at church early on a Sunday morning, she accompanied her. Graciously, Dr. Floyd Roebuck, pastor of First Baptist Church, Rome, would let her stand in the pulpit, a Bible in hand, and pretend to preach. Then, as a 10-year-old, she would take a summer trip to Backwoods Christian Camp with First Baptist, and it was there that she responded to the gospel and asked Jesus into her heart as her Lord and Savior. Sadly, these might be some of the last innocent memories she has where all seemed right in the world. Chaos and pain are the only words that come to mind to characterize her preteen and teenage years. Growing up in a household with someone who has deeply unresolved issues only to be medicated by substance abuse yields a recipe for disaster. As a result, she lived in a state of fear and anxiety, never knowing when the other shoe would drop, and when it did, you never knew what was coming for you. For refuge, she sought comfort in her mother and normalcy playing with her younger sister in the backyard, and when looking back, those are among her happiest memories. It wasn't until she was older that she realized what she had endured in her younger years was childhood trauma and abuse, and things only grew darker when she experienced sexual assault at 15 and then again at 16. And while I would never want to minimize the heartache and pain she experienced, there is a but. That but was a seed. That Backwoods Christian Camp gospel seed that was planted years ago. In the midst of it all, it took root deep underground and was starting to make its way up through the soil. At 17, the regeneration process started to become visible. She went from being the girl that always knew where to find a good party to the annoying, self-righteous, new believer girl who needed to tell everyone why everything that they were doing was wrong. Eventually, and miraculously, she graduated from Rome High School and made her way to Shorter University. In 2008, during her time at Shorter, she would scandalously meet the love of her life. And when I say scandalous, I do mean that it could be an entire podcast episode all on its own. But for now, maybe we should just leave the sleeping dogs where they lie. Around that same time, she would hear of a job opportunity as the student ministry intern at First Presbyterian Church, Rome. At this point in her life, she was running hard and fast after the Lord and was devouring books like God is the Gospel by John Piper, The Celebration of Discipline by Richard Foster, and Eclipse of Heaven by A.J. Conyers. Needless to say, the mere thought of working in ministry felt like a total dream. As she nervously pulled up for an interview with the director of student ministries, a young gentleman by the name of Bill Pardue hopped out of a Nissan Xterra in cargo shorts and Crocs that we can only pray have been burned at the stake by now. They got along great. She was hired, and for the first time in her whole life, she began to experience true discipleship. Tuesdays were deemed discipleship days at Chick-fil-A, and Bill would disciple the student ministry staff by going through a book of the Bible. Not only was she experiencing being discipled for the first time, she was also seeing a man, though not perfectly, walk out his faith and doing everything he could to call up those around him to do the same. About a year later, on November 21st, 2009, side note, homegirl moves at a very fast pace, she would marry the love of her life, and Bill Pardue would officiate his very first wedding. In May of 2010, she graduated college, again, miraculously, never much of a school kind of gal, and she said, "Peace out, Rome, Georgia. I am out of here and never coming back." The couple would move to the suburbs of Atlanta, have their first child in 2012, their second in 2015, and live happily ever after, right? Wrong. Oh, so wrong. While things may sound picture perfect, every believer knows that the process of sanctification and pruning can be a painful one. In this case, the remnants of her childhood trauma harshly resurfaced as she had her own children, and she coped by doing what she had always done. Seeking solace in comfort foods, a soothing balm she had discovered long ago that temporarily drowned out the pain in her soul. Only this time, the shame of those poor decisions plagued her, and not only did she absolutely hate her body, but she knew she had to do something about it. So like many of us in the year 2015, she did Whole30 and joined a CrossFit gym. As most CrossFitters do, she totally drank the Kool-Aid, as they say, and the idol shifted away from food and into working out. She loved it so much that she wanted to help others and got her level 1 certificate in 2019 and began coaching. She continued to coach classes for the next year and a half, and despite her arguments with the Lord that sounded a lot like, what? Are you sure? Is this what you're really calling us to? Because this was so not in my game plan. He was calling them to a change. What was this change? Oh, I'm so glad you asked. He was calling them right back to the place she swore she'd never return. Rome, Georgia. The Lord eventually gave them a peace and even an excitement about the move, and in 2021, they packed it all up and headed home. Through all of those years away, she continued to grow in her faith, but her body image and the desperate attempts to keep up with the culture's standards of beauty were all-consuming. Then one hot summer morning, after the move back, she decided to go for a run on the new Mount Berry Trail. While running, she was listening to a podcast on body image and heard an author say, "Your body is not a project." From childhood sickness through teenage assault and every attempt to beat her body into submission through exercise as an adult, for the very first time, she realized that she had never seen her body as anything but a project. Her whole life, she believed a lie, that there was an end goal, and if she could just get to it, if she could just fix what she saw as broken in her body, whether perceived or actual, happiness was waiting on the other side. When she realized she had fallen for that lie, it was a watershed moment for her, and she wanted to tell every woman that she knew that their body was not a project, but a God-given temple to steward for His glory and the good of others. So, she converted the old woodworking shop in their new backyard to a fully equipped gym, called it the Shred Shed, and spent the next year offering personal training to women who were looking for a safe place to work out and learn that exercise was much more than a physical activity. It was an offering. And then, just like a blast from the past, a phone call came, and it was about to shake up a lot of things. If you haven't figured it out by now, the girl in this story is me, and the family is mine. My amazing husband, David, and our two incredible children, Gray and Emmy, who would all agree that once we moved home to Rome and jumped back into First Pres, we experienced more community in 1 month than we did the entire 10 years we lived away. I joined the Women's Ministry Council, started writing for and running their social media, and became a team member responsible for communications on that year's capital campaign. We were absolutely loving it. But the one thing, I should say the other one thing I said I would never do was work in ministry again. Are you noticing a pattern here? I'll never move back to Rome. I'll never work in ministry again. I have come to realize that the Lord sure loves to challenge my never statements. So, with all that said, ring ring, this is, now all these years later, Senior Dr. Pastor Bill Pardue calling. I assume he had taken notice of what I had been doing for the women's ministry social media account, as well as my very small role in the capital campaign, and told me that he believed I had some gifts that the church could certainly use if I was open to the opportunity. I kind of scoffed and told him that I was very busy with my personal training business. Thank you very much. To which he replied, "Well, I'm going to keep asking, and you can keep saying no." I don't know if that was a genuine remark or a well-played tactic, but it worked like a charm, and at the beginning of 2023, I joined our staff part-time under the condition that I would be allowed to remain on the Women's Ministry Council because I really loved being a part of that. He agreed, and I jumped in. The year was going great. I was loving what I was doing, and as the fall rolled around, the Women's Ministry Council began preparing for our annual Women's Christmas Dinner. For this dinner, they wanted to ask several women to speak, and I felt the Lord nudging me to be one of those people. Per usual, I resisted. Then He pressed. Then I resisted harder. Then He pressed harder. And then, per usual, I was the one to yield. At this point, Stacy Pardue had become one of my closest friends since moving back, so for accountability, I called her up and said, "Listen, the Lord is just impressing it on my heart that I should speak at this Christmas dinner. I have 1,000 reasons why He has obviously dialed up the wrong number, and I'm saying it out loud to you so that I can't turn back." She encouraged me, was excited for me, and even offered to recommend me to others on the council as someone who should share. When I was given the green light as one of the speakers, I began dreaming of all the ways I could show off my deep theological prowess. But God said, no. He is so good at calling out our pride and flesh, isn't He? Just when I think it's all about me, He's like, actually, this has nothing to do with you at all. Instead, He made it crystal clear that I was to speak on Psalm 23, to which I scoffed. You're joking, right? This is like the most well-known psalm of them all. What else could there possibly be to learn from Psalm 23? And so there we were again, me resisting, Him pressing, until I finally yield. And for the record, I do not yield easily, just as my husband. In fact, I actually resonate with Jacob in that way. Something has to break before I'll finally give up. And there I go, walking away with a holy limp. So once I eventually relented and surrendered to teach on Psalm 23, the Lord confirmed it to me over and over again. For example, I went to the Gospel Coalition conference that year, and one of the breakout sessions that I chose was on developing your skills of leading and teaching. Lo and behold, one of the main passages they used for that breakout session was Psalm 23. It's in those moments that the only thing you can do is put your hands up and say, I hear you, Lord, I get it now. Before I read any commentaries on this psalm, I resolved to reading it every day for weeks or maybe even longer. What I learned is that I'm an absolute idiot. How could I ever think that there was nothing more to learn from Psalm 23? In fact, once I actually got into it, I realized that other than the rote memorization of it as a child, I really didn't know anything about it at all. When the time came for a commentary to deepen my understanding, I stumbled upon one by D.A. Carson, co-founder of the Gospel Coalition, called The Psalm of the Sheep. I was surprised at how much I would learn about sheep themselves, but it provided incredible context for the sheep and shepherd metaphor. In my talk that night, I shared how sheep, unlike us most of the time, understand their position of need and dependence on the shepherd for their very existence. I talked about how sheep never lie down when they're hungry, stressed, or scared. So the fact that the shepherd had them lie down in green pastures beside still waters indicates that they were very well taken care of. They had everything they needed. Having already been through some suffering myself, I was especially fired up to talk about the valley of the shadow of death. To quote my very words from that night, the shepherd not only made them lie in green pastures and led them beside still waters, he also led them through the valley of the shadow of death. Take note of how this is a declarative statement. Even though I walk, it's not a question. Meaning, walking through the valley is not something we will escape if we're lucky. No, it is an inevitable part of the believer's journey in this fallen world. Boom, mission accomplished. I walked off the stage with confidence, knowing that I had shared what the Lord wanted me to for someone who was out there that needed to hear it. And maybe that is true, but what I didn't know is how much I would need it only 2 months later. By this time, it was February of 2024. My husband, along with myself, were gifted a 7-day cruise through a vendor that his company works with. While I was looking forward to some interrupted time away, if I'm being totally honest, I didn't really want to go. 7 days away from my kids is a lot for me. I was missing my daughter's school play. And oh yeah, remember how I mentioned before that I had severe motion sickness as a child? Well, that was only getting worse with age, but whether I wanted to or not, we were locked into this thing and it was almost go time. Before leaving, I made a quick trip to the doctor's office and loaded up on Zofran as well as those scopolamine patches that are supposed to prevent seasickness. We got on the ship, the patch was doing its job, but after 2 days, I was pretty much over it. One thing about me is your girl is an introverted introvert, if there even is such a thing. I like my house, I like my bed, and I like my alone time. You can't escape people on a big old boat unless you plan on jumping off. So I learned real quick that the ship life, it ain't for me. But we did see some beautiful places and enjoyed one another's company, so I'll admit, it wasn't all bad. When it was time to depart the ship, fly from Puerto Rico to Atlanta, and drive from Atlanta to Rome, I was thrilled. This mama hen couldn't wait to get back to her nest and baby chicks. Not only that, but I absolutely love routine. So I also couldn't wait to get back to my 8:15 workout classes, my daily walks, and all of the mundane things of life that we often take for granted. We made it home March 3rd, 2024, and that is now a day that has marked me forever. I call it the worst best thing, because it's hard to remember what life inside of my body felt like before that day. And yet I have been changed physically, emotionally, and spiritually in profound ways because of it. When I woke up the next day, I expected some rocking and swaying like I was still on the boat because that's exactly where I'd been for the last 7 days. Surely most of you can relate to that feeling, right? If you've ever been on a boat or even played in the waves, you've probably went to sleep that night feeling like you were still there. But by morning, the feeling had passed, so you got up and you move on with your day. In my case, that morning of no motion never came. The only time it stopped was when I was back in physical motion, like riding in the car or running outside, which was a telltale sign of what I had begun to fear the most. Mal-Day Debarkment Syndrome. Mal-Day Debarkment Syndrome, MDDS for short, was not something I ever even knew existed until I began to, as one does, Google my symptoms. What I kept reading over and over in big bold letters as if they were jumping right off of my computer screen were the words, "No cure, 1 clinical trial in all of America in New York City. If it gets better, it could take months or even years." What? I was devastated. I needed it gone by the weekend, and you're telling me months, maybe even years? This diagnosis is tricky, not only because it's rare, but because it's neurological. It creates a persistent, and when I say persistent, I mean a never-ending, false sense of motion, like rocking, swaying, or bobbing, typically after a passive motion like sea or air travel. Many people confuse this with vertigo, and there are similarities, but the key difference is that MDDS is a central nervous system disorder rather than an inner ear problem. To put it in the simplest of terms, when you are in passive motion, your brain tells your vestibular system to adjust accordingly. In my case, my brain did what it was supposed to do while on the ship, but never recognized that I was back on land and therefore never adjusted back to a stable surface. My brain never realized that I was off the ship, so it continued to compensate. I felt like I was being tortured from the inside out, and there was absolutely nothing I could do about it. Because my brain was sending my vestibular system the improper signals, my vestibular system was no longer working as one cohesive unit. When I walked, it felt like I was walking on a trampoline. Internally, I felt like I was constantly rocking and swaying from side to side, causing a major deficit in my balance. The floor would all of a sudden feel like it dropped out from underneath me, like you would experience in an elevator, and I was experiencing something called a gravitational pull. If you've ever been on the plane train at the airport, or any train for that matter, and over the speaker you hear that woman come on and say, "Please hold on, this train is stopping." That's what the gravitational pull felt like. To give you another example, I'm a natural side sleeper, but this pull was so strong that I would wake up in the night on my back because of it. But wait, there's more. My brain was also recruiting all the muscles in my shoulders and my neck to stay in a constant state of bracing for impact, causing me to walk around with my shoulders shrugged at all times. My muscles were so tired but working so hard that this eventually led to head tremors that prevented me from being able to hold my head up unsupported for longer than just a few minutes. Whatever normal is or was, I wanted it back so bad. So in an effort to do something normal, I would try to go to the grocery store. But all of the external stimuli of packed shelves and tons of people sent my brain into overload, and then my eyes couldn't handle it. One day I even remember calling my husband from a Kroger aisle and crying because I couldn't remember what I was there for. My brain was working so hard to overcompensate for everything that was going on that my executive functioning skills completely broke down. Now, what you just heard were all of the physical symptoms of MDDS, but the mental anguish of it all was one that is so hard to even put into words. Having to hold on to something while attempting to have a conversation with your children or your husband because your balance is so bad is a horrible feeling. My family saw me cry every single day, and unless I was walking or in some type of motion to help lower the symptoms, I was in bed, completely helpless, completely useless. Weeks went by, doctor's appointments upon doctor's appointments, and still no answers, just a referral to the next specialist. The problem is that MDDS can't be seen, so it's a diagnosis by elimination. When it came time for a CT scan and MRI of my brain, I actually prayed that there would be something wrong so that we could at least move in the direction of a solution. But there was nothing. I told God, I just want my old life back. And in a way that only He can, He said, we aren't going back, but we will rebuild. Well, not only was that not the answer I was looking for, I didn't even know what He meant by it. And the suffering continued. Looking back now, I think of Jesus fasting for 40 days in the wilderness, and why what I'm about to tell you leads me to a belief that one way Satan tempts and attacks us is when we're in a physically vulnerable or painful place, just like he did to Jesus. Now, I understand that Jesus was fully God, but he was also fully man, which means he had to be hurting after 40 days without any earthly sustenance. And though my physical pain was different, the attacks came. I can vividly even see it in my mind's eye in this very moment. I remember crying in my bed when I heard a small voice in my head say, "Your children will be better off without you. Who wants a mother that can't get out of bed?" I sunk deeper into my covers and wept, thinking of my uncle, who was the second of my mom's brothers to take his own life just 1 year prior to this moment. And then I finally understood. It isn't that you want to die, it's that you just want relief. When you're in that level of pain, whether physical, mental, or both, and there's no end in sight, dying actually feels like an extension of God's mercy. Clearly, I had reached my breaking point. I would regularly collapse into the bathroom floor, begging and screaming at God to make it stop. I was often awoken in the middle of the night because it felt like someone was shaking the bed. I would look around for one of my cats to be scratching or licking themselves, only to realize that it was all in my head. So I would put my hands in the air and tell God, "I feel like you have betrayed me." And this came from such a deep wound in my history. Some of the people closest to me in my childhood and the ones in charge of my well-being and protection are the same ones who hurt me the most. But God would never do that to me. Not like this. I trusted you, I would say. I knew He could fix it, but He wasn't. So how is that protection? In a very stark contrast to the temptation from Satan that I experienced in my bed weeks before, there was another day while, you guessed it, lying in bed, a small voice recited one line from Psalm 23 back to me. "You restore my soul," it whispered. It wasn't audible, but I knew it was the Lord, and I quickly retorted by saying, "Yeah, but what about my body?" Things had deteriorated so quickly by that point that I had to lean onto the wall just to have a conversation with someone, otherwise I would fall over. So my body was all that I cared about. His answer? You restore my soul. You restore my soul. You restore my soul. So for a reason that I can only conclude was the Lord's doing, I got out of bed, went to the back porch, and pulled up that same D.A. Carson commentary on Psalm 23 that I used for that women's Christmas dinner, where I was going to rush up there and help so many people. Now, bear in mind, I read this article in its entirety before giving this talk, and yet this one section was something I have no recollection of reading. I went straight to verse 3, and here's what Carson says, quote, "The word my soul, the word behind my soul, as often in Scripture here, means something like my life, myself. He restores me. He restores my life." I wept at the thought of being even the slightest bit capable again. And if that weren't enough, he goes on to explain how sheep can become cast, meaning they get stuck on their back, legs in the air, flailing about and utterly helpless to turn themselves back upright. Then he wrote, "It happens when certain sheep lose their balance." Did you hear what I just said? Their balance. When the Lord used this commentary to nurture me, he was so specific to use the word balance, which is exactly what was happening to me. Oh my gosh, I was the sheep, and I just was realizing it for the first time. Within this, there were 3 things God wanted me to learn. The first, I see you, I hear you, I'm with you. Which technically that's 3 things, but you know. The second was a warning. Carson explains how a cast sheep is as good as dead because they are extremely vulnerable to predators in that condition, and it was the exact same for me. My predator was lurking, and I needed to be on guard. So that second thing again was a warning that the enemy is real, and he knows the state that I'm in. The third thing the Lord was wanting me to learn from this was that he was coming for me. One of the reasons that a good shepherd is constantly counting his flock was to be sure that one of his sheep had not wandered off and become cast. But if they had, the only way that that sheep survives is if that good shepherd finds them and carries them on his shoulders until they are stable enough to walk again. I didn't know when, I didn't know how, and I didn't know how things would turn out, but on that day, he promised that he was coming for me, and I believed him. I didn't tell anyone this story for quite a long time. The only person that knew was the one person that was taking care of me in every single aspect of our lives, my husband David. He would lie in bed with me and pray out loud over me while we listened to worship music. He would work a full day, then pick the kids up from school and cook us all dinner. He went to every school event and on every field trip. He served and he served and he served, and he never complained. And just as a side note, to any of my single ladies that might be listening to this, please don't settle and marry a man because you are scared to be alone. Wait for the one who will be the hands and feet of Jesus to you when the bottom falls out, because it will. And if the Lord intends for you to remain unmarried, trust that your good shepherd will not only sustain you, but supply you with an abundance of joy and care beyond anything your mind can comprehend. Now, 4 months into this thing, 8 weeks spent driving to a treatment facility in Marietta that had assured me of a cure, only to barely move the needle, and my symptoms were still raging. It was time. I asked if the elders would come pray over me. They packed into my living room, listened to what was happening, anointed my head with oil, And when Pastor Bill asked Tony Pemberton to pray, he started praying Psalm 23. And I cannot even make up this good of a story. David and I were absolutely beside ourselves because we still had not told anyone about the significance of this psalm to us. It was one of the most cherished nights of my entire life. In fact, I even saved the footage from my doorbell camera as they all walked out of my house, and I told my husband, even if nothing changes in my condition, this night and this experience of God's people will have been worth it. 10 doctors, and 7 months later, I finally found a neurologist in Texas that specializes in disorders like mine and would see me virtually. He started me on a regimen of medications that have helped to stabilize my brain and are working to correct the incorrect signals my brain wants to send out. I would never feel like my old self again, but for the first time, the relentless waves of chaos inside my head started to calm, and I began living and not just surviving my life again. March 3rd, 2025 was a Monday, and also the 1-year anniversary of getting off of the ship. The very Sunday before, which was March 2nd, you'll never guess what we sang in church that day. Or maybe you will. If you guessed Psalm 23, you would be right. It would now be 4 months after that, July the 3rd, in fact, when I got a phone call about a tragedy that had occurred that, if I'm honest, I'm still trying to process and wrap my head around. Someone incredibly dear and close to me jumped to her death from her condo window at the age of 84. I was so shaken and just an emotional wreck as I walked into her funeral service, but quickly learned that, in a way that only makes sense if you knew her, she had planned out her entire service. And the only scripture that she had chosen for the entire congregation to stand and read aloud together was Psalm 23. And there I was again, much like I was on the back porch that day, distraught, but reminded of 3 things by the good shepherd. 1, he sees me, he hears me, he's with me. 2, in my grief, I am vulnerable to an enemy that seeks to steal, kill, and destroy. And 3, this good shepherd is coming for me. So now I ask you a question. Do you know and really believe that he is coming for you too? That when Jesus died on the cross and rose from the grave, he made the impossible a reality? And when Pastor Bill preached on Psalm 23 a few Sundays ago, did you hear him say that he has a table prepared for you and for me in the middle of our valleys? While that's true, it isn't even the best part. God doesn't just prepare a table in our valley. He sits down with us and we all feast together. My circumstances 2 years post-cruise are significantly better than they were, but are definitely not over. Unless the Lord chooses to completely heal me from this condition, it is likely something I will manage until he calls me home. Maybe you're like me and your story is also woven with illness or abuse or loss. Or maybe it's not and your circumstances look completely different than mine. Either way, we all have a story. We all walk through the hard, tragic things. But here's what I have come to know, and it's this. Sometimes his good for me looks nothing like what I would have chosen for myself. But when I sit down at that table in the valley to dine and abide with the Good Shepherd, my cup will runneth over. And sometimes the worst thing really does become the best thing. Thanks for listening.